It was a dark Friday in Jerusalem. Clouds gathered over Golgotha, anticipating the moment that would split history in two. At the foot of the three crosses, a Roman centurion carried out an order to execute another crucifixion, this time of Jesus of Nazareth. His duty was clear: ensure that he died, and so he did. When the 6th hour came, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Then Jesus, with a loud cry, breathed his last. Suddenly, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the centurion standing before him said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." That day the fate of this Roman soldier changed forever. The one responsible for overseeing Jesus' death was shaken to his very core. He went from being an executioner to a witness, from piercing Jesus' body with a spear to becoming the first Gentile to believe that he is the Son of God. He renounced his position as a high-ranking officer of the most powerful empire on earth and joined the followers of Jesus. He took his word to distant lands, proclaiming the gospel with the passion of someone who had seen it all and had been transformed. But his terrible end was also marked in the history of the church under his name, Longinus. Before that dark Friday, Longinus was a Roman centurion. Centurions were leaders of legions, commanding over 100 men. They were highly respected officers known for their discipline, courage, and effectiveness on the battlefield. Their lives were defined by harshness, violence, and duty. To rise to the rank of centurion, it wasn't enough to be strong. One needed to be intelligent, strategic, and above all, relentless. And Longinus was all of that. His life revolved around discipline, order, and blind obedience to Rome. He had witnessed death without flinching, carried out orders without hesitation, and had become an instrument of the empire. Until that day. The city had not yet fully awakened, but hurried footsteps, hushed voices, and one name whispered through the shadows could already be heard: Jesus of Nazareth. The night before, he had been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, betrayed with a kiss by one of his own, Judas Iscariot, for 30 pieces of silver. He was brought before the Sanhedrin, the council of high priests, who accused him of blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God. There he was beaten, spat upon, and condemned. But they didn't have the power to execute him. For that, they needed the authorization of Rome. And so, at dawn, they brought him before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. Pilate, seated on the tribunal, looked at Jesus with curiosity and asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus responded calmly, "You say so." The chief priests and elders accused him, but Jesus remained silent. Pilate, bewildered, leaned toward him and said, "Do you not hear all these things they accuse you of? Won't you defend yourself?" Jesus said nothing. He neither justified nor defended himself. Pilate was astonished. He had seen criminals beg, lie, and cry to save their lives. But this man possessed an overwhelming calm. Then a messenger quickly approached the tribunal. It was an urgent message from Pilate's wife, which read, "Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered much today in a dream because of him." Pilate shifted uneasily in his seat. He felt that something greater than himself was unfolding and that he couldn't stop it. It was customary to release one prisoner during the Passover, and Pilate thought he had found a way out. He offered the crowd a choice between Jesus, called the Christ, and Barabbas, a notorious criminal and murderer. But the priests and religious leaders incited the crowd to shout with hatred, "Barabbas!" Pilate raised his hands and asked, "What then shall I do with Jesus?" The crowd shouted with fury, "Crucify him!" Pilate, still uneasy, asked once more, "Why? What evil has he done?" But the response was even more brutal than before, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Seeing that he could do nothing against this tide of rage, Pilate took a basin of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of the blood of this just man. See to it yourselves." Then Pilate released Barabbas and handed Jesus over to be crucified. The destiny of the Son of God was sealed. The soldiers took Jesus to the praetorium. The centurion Longinus, as always, stood firm at the entrance. He had overseen dozens of punishments and had seen many men die. But that day something was different. The prisoner before them offered no resistance, didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't beg. He endured every blow as if he knew it was necessary. The soldiers, cruel in their amusement, stripped him of his clothes, tied him tightly to the column, and began whipping him with brutality. The whip descended again and again, mercilessly tearing his flesh, and still he did not scream. Longinus observed, arms crossed, his face hardened by years of violence, but something in his eyes began to shift. The other soldiers mocked him. They draped a purple robe over his shoulders, wove a crown of thorns and pressed it into his head. Blood covered his face, but his eyes remained open, fixed, serene. They placed a staff in his hands as if it were a scepter. They knelt before him and laughed, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Longinus didn't join in the mockery, he only watched. And for the first time in years he felt discomfort, not from the violence but from the dignity of this beaten man. They spat on him, struck him repeatedly on the head with the staff, and when they tired of the game they ripped off the robe, dressed him again in his clothes and prepared him for crucifixion. But Longinus couldn't look away. Something within him, long dormant, was beginning to awaken. He didn't understand why this man didn't defend himself, why, amidst the humiliation, there was no hatred on his face, only a profound compassion. While others laughed, he began to question who this man really was. He didn't know yet, but he would soon find out, because that day Longinus would bear witness to the greatest act of love the world had ever known, and his life would never be the same. The soldiers took Jesus, pushed him outside the praetorium, and placed a rough, heavy cross on his shoulders, stained already by the history of others condemned. The journey to Golgotha had begun. The centurion Longinus walked ahead, clearing the path through the crowd. It was his duty to escort the prisoner to the place of crucifixion. Golgotha, the hill of skulls, where those Rome wished to forget would die. Jesus moved forward amidst shoves and shouts. Some spat on him, others insulted him, but there were also those who wept silently. In the midst of the crowd, his mother Mary searched desperately with her eyes. She couldn't bear to see him like this, so she asked the disciple John, "John, help me. Bring me to my son." Both made their way through the crowd. But then a soldier pushed Jesus with force. His exhausted body collapsed onto the stones. It was his first fall. Jesus fell and the cross fell on top of him. The soldiers whipped him again. "Get up," they shouted. With great effort Jesus stood up. Mary and John managed to get closer just as Jesus fell for the second time. Mary couldn't hold back and ran to him. She knelt by his side, trembling hands and anguished eyes, and with a broken voice said, "I'm here." Jesus lifted his bloodied face and responded, "Behold, Mother, how I make all things new." It wasn't a phrase of comfort but a living prophecy of what was about to happen. The weight of the cross crushed his wounded back. His body was beginning to give in and Jesus fell again. The soldiers whipped him to make him get up, but he couldn't. His knees no longer responded. Longinus watched him. He had seen others, defeated, broken, but Jesus was not defeated. There was something in him that didn't break. Then the centurion Longinus took a man from the field who happened to be passing by and ordered him, "You take the cross." Slowly Jesus rose to his feet. His eyes sought the man's and though exhausted, he gave him a look of gratitude. The procession continued while Simon helped Jesus carry the cross. The streets bore witness to a march of death. Women wept. Jesus, bleeding and exhausted, turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." Longinus heard those words and his heart trembled again. Who was this man who, on the brink of collapse, thought of others? Finally they arrived at Golgotha, a dry, arid hill destined for horror. The 3 wooden beams were already prepared and the soldiers began their work. Jesus didn't struggle, didn't curse, didn't resist. He extended his arms as if offering his body, as if surrendering by his own will. Then came the moment. One of the soldiers held his arm, another raised the hammer. A scream was stifled in the sky. Mary trembled. John averted his gaze. The people murmured with each strike of the hammer. Some cried, others still mocked. And Longinus remained standing, motionless. When the 3 were crucified, Jesus in the middle and 2 criminals on either side, the soldiers raised the crosses with effort. The wood fell into its hole with a dull thud, and Jesus' body violently shook from the impact. The criminals on either side screamed. One of them looked at Jesus with contempt and shouted, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us too." But the other, with a weak but truthful voice, rebuked his companion and said, "Do you not even fear God? We are under the same condemnation. We deserve this punishment for we are paying for what we did, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned his face toward Jesus and whispered, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And with that, Jesus pronounced a promise that would echo through the centuries, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Longinus, watching from his post, couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had witnessed many executions, but he had never seen anyone like Jesus. Time passed but the world seemed to have stopped. The sun ceased shining and a mantle of darkness spread over the entire region. Longinus, standing guard, kept watching. Jesus, hanging from the cross, still had words, not of pain but of forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Longinus felt a tremor in his chest. Forgiveness, for those who whipped him, for those who nailed him, for those who mocked him, and for him as well. The first distant thunder rumbled. A storm was approaching. Caiaphas, satisfied, left with the other religious leaders, but Mary remained broken with grief, supported tenderly by John. With a weak but clear voice Jesus spoke, "Woman, behold your son." Then looking at John he said, "Behold your mother." Jesus' body began to weaken. And then, with a cry that tore through the silence, he called out to heaven, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some thought he was calling Elijah, expecting celestial help, believing the prophet would come to save him. Then one of them ran, soaked a sponge in vinegar, placed it on a reed, and brought it to his lips. But Jesus didn't drink. He wouldn't accept relief. His sacrifice had to be total. Silence became absolute. Jesus raised his gaze. He knew everything was coming to an end. Then, with the last strength he had, he proclaimed, "It is finished." The heavens held their breath. And for the last time, Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." With those words, he bowed his head and died. Suddenly the earth responded. At that moment, the ground shook beneath everyone's feet. A great earthquake shook Jerusalem. Rocks split, tombs opened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The people fell silent. Faces that had been mocking filled with fear. Many began to beat their chests, realizing what they had done. And then the centurion Longinus fell to his knees. Words escaped his lips uncontrollably, and with a broken voice, he declared before all, "Truly this man was the Son of God." The centurion responsible for his crucifixion became the first Gentile to publicly acknowledge Christ crucified. And then silence fell like a mantle over Golgotha. The body of Jesus hung lifeless. The soldiers, unsettled by the growing commotion, began to retreat. The frightened and confused crowd dispersed. It was the day of preparation for the Passover, and the Jews did not allow bodies to remain on the crosses during the Sabbath. So they went to Pilate to request that he order the legs of the condemned to be broken to hasten their deaths. The order was given to the centurion Longinus, who then commanded it. The soldiers, without hesitation, took a large iron bar, approached the thieves crucified alongside Jesus, and broke their legs. Longinus knew Jesus was already dead, but it was his duty to confirm it. It was Roman law. So Longinus took his spear, approached the cross, and with a firm motion pierced Jesus' side. At that moment, blood and water flowed out. The evangelist John, who was present, would later write solemnly, "And he who saw it has borne witness, and his testimony is true." Longinus observed the wound and his spear stained with that pure blood. Unknowingly, he had just witnessed the fulfillment of prophecy, "They shall look on him whom they have pierced." It was symbolic, blood to redeem, water to purify. The blood fell on his face, and according to tradition, he had an ailment in his eyes that clouded his vision. But upon receiving that sacred mixture on his eyes, he regained his sight. There, at the foot of the cross, under a sky still weeping, Longinus understood. He realized that he hadn't executed a rebel. He had driven a spear into the body of the Son of God. He fell to his knees once more, now as a believer. Sacred texts don't record every step that followed, but church tradition and various ancient documents narrate what came next. Longinus, troubled and shaken by what he had seen, couldn't return to the camp as if nothing had happened. For days he didn't sleep. The image of Christ hanging on the cross in silence haunted him like an unquenchable flame. He could no longer obey orders without questioning whether he served the truth or a blind empire. After the crucifixion, rumors began to spread in Jerusalem. They said the tomb of Jesus was empty. Some spoke of appearances, of encounters with the man he himself had seen die on the cross. The centurion listened in silence, but every word that reached his ears ignited something within him. Deep in his soul, he knew it wasn't a lie. Something inside told him death hadn't been the end. For days he found no peace. The images of Golgotha pursued him like a sacred fire. He remembered every word of Jesus, every look, every silence. While the world returned to its routine, he couldn't go back to his. He couldn't continue being the relentless centurion he had been for years. His heart, hardened by iron and blood, began to crack. When he heard that some claimed to have seen him alive, he wasn't surprised. He didn't feel skepticism or confusion, only a quiet and powerful confirmation. Yes, it was true. Jesus had conquered death. For the first time, Longinus began to understand what faith meant. For the first time he grasped the real weight of the cross, the value of forgiveness, and the immense power of redemption. Finally he understood. He renounced his position, removed his armor, returned his sword, and without looking back, left the army of Rome. He began his journey of faith. He joined the disciples, sought out those who had known him, and began to learn from the one he had once executed. His name, Longinus, began to circulate among the first believers. The Roman centurion who had commanded men in the name of the empire now walked barefoot with a heart ablaze, preaching about a king he had once helped crucify. 4 years he traveled through the regions of Cappadocia and Caesarea in modern-day Turkey, preaching the name of the one he had once crucified. "I saw him die," he would say, "but in his death I discovered life." His testimony was powerful. He didn't speak from theories or hearsay. He had been there and his story moved hearts. The man who once wielded the sword now raised the word of the gospel with courage. Longinus proclaimed the gospel and many believed, for he was no ordinary preacher. He was the centurion who had stood at the foot of the cross. But Rome does not forgive those who turn away from its authority, and for this reason he was persecuted. Longinus was arrested, interrogated, beaten, and threatened with death. They offered him freedom in exchange for denying Christ. But Longinus, with the peace of one who has found the truth, answered with his faith and was thus condemned. The same empire that had trained him as a soldier would now execute him as a traitor. They took him outside the city and there, on a deserted hill, he was beheaded. Longinus died as a martyr but not in fear. With his eyes raised high, like the one he had seen lift his gaze on the cross and say, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." His body was buried in the region of Cappadocia, and soon Christians in the area began to venerate him as a saint. Many claimed miracles and healings occurred at his tomb, and his name began to be remembered not as the executioner but as a witness, believer, and martyr. Thus, through the centuries the Church recognized him as Saint Longinus, the one who saw, who believed, and who died for the one who first died for him. But he wasn't the only one. You must also know the stories of Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Thaddeus, and James. From the streets of Jerusalem to the ends of the earth, these 12 men carried a message that defied kings, toppled temples, and split history in two. They had no armies, no swords, no political alliances, only the faith of what they had seen in their word. You need to watch the video that appears on the screen, the movie Apostles. This isn't just the story of the Church, it's the story of how 12 men challenged the most powerful empire in history and conquered the world with nothing but their faith and the sacrifices they made to achieve it.